All right, you know what time it is? It's time for the Power Hour. I'm your host, DJ Larry Jones. And today we're going to be talking about parenting, right?
That's right.
And as parents, we all want the best for our children. We strive to provide them with, all they need to grow and succeed in life. But in this journey of parenthood, we often face challenges that make us question if we're doing enough. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. NICOLE Robinson.
Thank you so much, Larry. It's so nice to be here.
It's a pleasure having you on the show. It's a pleasure having you on the show. And I want to thank you for being with me today. I want to jump right into it. What do you think is the most important quality a parent should have?
Hmm.
I would say communication skills. Would that be one of them?
It's very important, but I think you need to have good self-awareness
Mhm.
before you even get to the communication, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And let's talk about today's children growing up in today's society. It's much different from when you and I came up, right?
Oh, yes.
Different. Now, when we came up, we would sit down at the dinner table with our families, and there were no phones, no cell phones, there were no computer gadgets. We would
Yeah.
sit down as a family and talk as a family.
Yes.
What do you think about that nowadays? We don't see too much of that. Not saying that people don't do it, but
Right.
you don't see much of it.
So in our house, we do have a no tech at the table rule, which we sometimes break if we're talking about something together and there's a piece of information that's relevant, but nobody's buried in their phone. No phones are on the table. And sometimes if we have someone else with us, like an extended family member, my daughter will actually remind them that they're breaking the rule because if she has to follow it, of course, everybody does. So you can use that rule because family meal times are so important and so valuable. We do need to be aware of our use of technology and what we model, right? Because again, we can't say the rule is a rule and then do something different.
Yeah,
The
yeah, and
rule. Yeah.
we don't enforce it ourselves, right?
That's right. That's right.
Now, let's talk about balancing, and I said this in the beginning, friendship, and how do you being a friend and a disciplinarian?
Right. So, in some way, I just had this conversation with someone yesterday, actually. In some way, it's helpful to think about it as a friendship in that it's a relationship that's so important. And when we're in a relationship, we're going to have challenges to navigate. We try to show up in the best way we can for each other. So sometimes we can use that to say, I love you and I care about you. So here's why I do X, Y, and Z. Or, that did not feel nice to hear because, right? And, using that closeness to teach important lessons and learn things that can be translated to other relationships, if that makes sense.
Right.
But we have to be comfortable enough with limit setting that there are walls because it doesn't feel good to kids to have a sense that their power is limitless or that there's nothing to contain their emotions, right? They will expand to the size of whatever container they're in. And if that container is infinite in size, that's a very scary feeling, actually. So I think it's helpful to know that setting limits is not something you have to feel bad about if you have a closeness with your kid. It's something that you're doing for their benefit.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
if you're more of a friend to them than a disciplinarian, then when you go to be that disciplinarian, they tend not to listen to you because you acted more as a friend, right?
I think so. I think it's true to either extreme, right? If you are only ever disciplining, you become like the teacher in Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 wah. They sort of like tune you out at some point. There they go again. Or they figure out how to evade, right?
Yeah.
They work around you. They do things when you're not looking. So I think having that balance between closeness and limit setting allows a space where they can sort of test things out, but know that if there's a line, the line is there for a good reason, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. And I want to move on to conflict. Okay, and that kind of goes with being a disciplinarian, right? How would you approach handling conflict with your children when they, when trying to discipline them and be a friend, and you go to, discipline them? How would you handle that conflict?
So I think it depends on the nature of the conflict. And then, whether it's between the two of you or it involves someone else in the family. Sometimes there are other kids in the mix, other adults even. So I think, just trying to truly resolve whatever is happening, right? We all have different ways of handling conflict based upon what came to feel normal to us growing up. You either both come in toward each other or both go away, or one person comes in and one person flees. So just sort of having a sense of the dynamic. And I think it helps to try to see what's underneath it, that often whatever appears to be the reason for the conflict, it may be about something more. It may be about, do you really love me? Who has the power here? I don't feel respected. That it's not really about, who's got the ball or, the TV remote or whatever it may be.
Right.
It's about the feeling beneath it. And so I think if you can address that, that will be more effective in solving the conflict. And you can teach, you asked about communication skills. You can teach communication skills in that way. And I think it's critical to try to stay calm in those moments, to be sort of the level-headed captain of the ship that knows that this is figure outable, and you just sort of walk through that process. Sometimes we have to step away a minute because we're hot too. You have to cool yourself down first until you can handle that.
Definitely. Now, in your profession, what do you see? What are the age ranges that you have to deal with on a daily basis, and what are some of the issues that you have to deal with when it comes to children and parenting?
So in my career, I've worked everything from NICU to 102. I have been throughout the whole lifespan, but presently in my practice, the youngest kids I see are about 8, and then the oldest are in their 20s. So a lot of what I see is ADHD, anxiety. I work with kids on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum. Learning disabilities. I perform neuropsychological assessments. So there I will see kids with a variety of cognitive or learning challenges. And a lot of it is behavior, things like sleep and peer relations that tend to come up pretty frequently in the course of child development.
Right.
So
now, when you're dealing with, here's a question. When you're dealing with children from the age ranges of 8 and whatever, let's say 12, how can you determine a tantrum from ADHD?
that's a great question. So if you look at any diagnosis, right, and why do we use a label? It helps us to understand, it helps us to connect to resources. And so if there is a pattern, right? So we could look at any diagnosis and say, oh, that sounds like me. Oh, that sounds like my kid, right? But you need to fit the pattern. And so, yes, if you have ADHD, you can have challenges regulating your emotions. But just because you have challenges regulating your emotions doesn't mean you have ADHD. It means you're human. We all have those difficulties, right? So how do you make that distinction? There are different types of ADHD. So the type you have, there are different behaviors or challenges associated with each type. But if you have a kid who's persistently dysregulated, really has trouble getting started when they need to get started, calming down when they need to calm down, that's when you start to think, okay, is there something of clinical importance going on here? The degree to which it gets in your way or in the way of the people around you is one of the ways we really know what we're looking at.
Right. Now, let's talk about communicating and building strong relationships with your child. How can we build a strong relationship, as far as getting them to open up to us. A lot of kids
Mm.
won't open up to you. They'll go to school, they'll come home, you don't know what happens in their day. They run straight to the room, get on their devices, and that's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there are some great parents out there who are really on top of their children's work, and you know, but how do you do that? Build a strong communication between you and your child.
I think a big component of this is understanding that when kids are small, things that may feel small to us are not small to them. It's the whole world. In that moment, it's everything.
Yeah.
So if you can, in those moments, little by little, from the time they're born, really take them seriously, right? So if your infant is expressing distress, to be responsive. If your little one feels sad about something they cared about that broke, rather than saying, it's not important, we can get a new one, why are you so worked up, right? We show compassion to say, you're so sad, that was really important to you. I think sometimes we worry that if we indulge a feeling, we are sort of making them weak, or that they will become more distressed, right? If we acknowledge that feeling, that somehow it won't end. But really it's the opposite, because they need that support in that moment, and that's what soothes them. If we make a response that's not in line with their feelings, oftentimes when you asked about tantrums, they will escalate.
Yeah.
I don't think you get how I'm feeling, let me demonstrate that to you, right? So if we take their concerns seriously from the time they're small, as they get older, they will know that they can come to us and we can hold it. And I think it's important also not to overreact. Sometimes you can be over responsive, and they tell you something happened at school and you say, oh, that's it, I'm calling the principal, I'm going up there, I'm calling her mother. Then kids either feel, oh, I can't tell her because she'll overreact, she'll embarrass me, or my dad will get so angry. They maybe think that we're upset with them. But the other piece of it is they need to know everything will be okay. And if when they come to you, they get the sense that everything's not okay. Nobody wants to fly on a plane with a pilot who, when you run into turbulence, comes on and says, oh my God, we're going to die. Nobody wants that, right? You've got to be the steady, calm presence. So I think taking them seriously, but also sort of maintaining sort of a calm presence, and also to make time and space. Again, going back to the technology, if we're buried on our phones, are we approachable? Kids don't always want to sit down and look at us face to face and say, here's what happened today. That's more of an adult thing lots of times. But if you're riding in the car together, or you're both putting away the groceries, or you're sort of doing something in a shared environment where they can have that time and space to open up. They don't have to come to you and knock on the door and make it a whole thing. You're around, you're there for them to open that moment.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Location, wherever you are, the setting can make a difference. Like you said, if you're in a car, it's, you open up, you talk about things that you wouldn't normally talk about when you're home. So
sometimes face to face is too intense.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And especially I think because of technology, kids don't have the conversational skills that most adults have. It's partly developmental, but it's partly because it's a skill that they aren't practicing as much. They're writing in shorthand. They're not calling each other on the phone, and they might FaceTime or have other ways that they're interacting. And yes, there's some live interaction, but even during the school day, you're sitting in a chair, you might have a few minutes of recess, you're in activities, they're structured activities, you're not out on the block, right? So those conversational skills are different for them. Their comfort level will be different.
Right. What do you feel about being the cool mom and dad? Should a parent be the cool mom and dad and know all of their kids' friends, and you got the cool house to come over? What do you think about that?
That's a great question. I think it depends on how you define cool, right? So if cool means you are getting on the level of those kids, if that means that you have kids in your house that are doing something that's, by your judgment, not safe or a good idea, but you want to get in with the kids. So you go, yeah, let's all do that together, right? That's not making a boundary that they need you to make. But I think if by being the cool parent, you mean, like you say, knowing who all the friends are. I mean, you've got to have a good awareness of what's happening in their world so that you can monitor and be a part of the conversation, so that if they want to come to you about something that happened, they don't have to give you a huge backstory. You know who all the players are. And I think it's great to have a house that is the house everyone can come to. And, they're comfortable and safe there. They can enjoy themselves in an environment that's positive.
Right.
That part I think is a great thing.
Right, because 99% of the time they're going to talk to their friend before they come to us.
At a certain age, that's absolutely true. We see that in research, that peer influence increases and our influence decreases, which is why it's so important to be present when kids are young. We can't sort of, be so busy with work or other things that we are absent. And sometimes it's not something outside of the home. Sometimes it's the business of everyday life. I'm so busy trying to keep up with whatever happens in this house that I don't seem emotionally available. I don't seem present. I just seem like I'm too occupied with other things to really be easy to come to, right?
Right. And we think just because we go to work, some of us, just because we go to work, pay the bills, and don't give the child our attention, that can be a problem as well. We're so tired when we come home from work. You work all day, you're tired. He or she says, well, Mom, Dad, this happened in school today, and you brush it off. Oh, well, okay, it'll be okay. And you go jump in the shower and lay down and relax, and you never give the child that attention. What's your opinion on praise and criticism? Should we praise our child when they do something right? Should we, I wouldn't say something right, something they should supposed to be doing anyway. Should we praise?
I think that if we recognize that our voice will one day become the voice inside of their head, then that awareness helps us make every other decision. Do you know what I mean? So what do I want them to think one day? And, do we praise every little thing? I mean, it would become nonsensical at some point, right? To follow them around saying everything they did, good job, good job. But I think we do have to be careful not to be so fast to criticize, but then slow to notice when they're improving. A lot of kids I work with will complain to me about this. They never forget to tell me if I didn't do something I was supposed to. But when I try to do the right thing, they don't even notice half the time. So I think it's important to be aware. I talk about this sometimes, water the flowers, not the weeds. You want to give your attention to the thing you want to see more of, because if it's got sunlight and we're watering it and all those conditions are right, that's what will grow. So I think praise is a good thing, and praising publicly even is a good thing, that you praise in public, criticize in private. But especially, what I referenced about the kids I work with, I think it's when it's something that's a point of contention or developmentally it's a sticking point for them. I think then it's especially important to acknowledge when that skill comes in or when they're finally motivated and getting it right, to say, look at you. And how good do you feel, right? That it's not just about how we feel about them. It's about them being the kind of person they can feel good about.
Absolutely. And let's talk about, how do we instill good values and morals in kids at such a young age? I mean, because it starts from when they're really young.
Yes.
Can't start 20s to try to instill values. It has to come from, what is the youngest age we should start that?
It starts from the moment they are with us, because we, in everything we do, are expressing to them what's important, what matters, how do you treat other people. So everything we do, how we treat them says something about what they deserve, and what they can expect of the world. So immediately we are setting that example. And that's not to say that if you don't feel good about the way you were in the past, that you can't change from this moment on. But it's never too early to start. And it's really a lot about living by example. Of course, if we see our child behaving in ways that are not consistent with our family's values, we need to address that, right? We can't let that go unchecked. But a big part of it is modeling what we want to see, right? We can't say, bullying is mean, you never bully someone, and then talk poorly about another parent or another kid in a way that's unkind, that's an inconsistent message. They will do as we do much more than as we say. So just living by example, really.
Right. Now, we talked about social media devices and all of that stuff. How should we monitor that? Because they're on their devices, whether it's a tablet, and they know how to operate this stuff. I mean, when we were younger, I couldn't operate this stuff. You know what I mean? It was foreign to me. It wasn't even around, first of all. But I'm looking at 3 and 4-year-olds just operating tablets and phones, and I'm like, wow. Let's talk about the safety of that and monitoring what they're actually seeing.
Yes. And monitoring what they're seeing and being aware of whether they are using interactive or non-interactive media. So, if you're using the iPad to FaceTime grandparents or to do something that's engaging, that's one sort of thing. If you are, very passively consuming videos, you are looking but not really listening, right? I think we need to think about the brain and what's developing. The auditory cortex versus the visual cortex, that's all coming online when they're little. And if all you're ever doing is primarily consuming through the visual sense, that's something to consider. But I think it really depends on the amount of time spent and how it's being used. We're past the point, I think, of, for most of us, if you are close to other people in an urban environment, if you're sort of isolated, I think it's easier to make a little bubble if you so choose. But for most of us, I think we're past the point where we can say, okay, we're just not doing this. Tweens and teens, they're not a part of the conversation if everyone in their environment has access to certain apps or devices. So how do we balance allowing them to be part of that conversation and, protecting them, using keywords, setting limits, whether it's on the amount of time or what they can access, is incredibly important. And just being aware, what's on their For You page, that'll show you what they've been looking at. This is where it's good to keep openness so that if they see something disturbing or uncomfortable, which you can sort of prime them with before they get started, here are the rules. And if you ever see something that makes you uncomfortable or that you have questions about, don't be afraid to get in trouble. Come to me and ask. I always want you to do that. Just keeping that openness so that if anything goes awry, they have you as that sort of wise consultant to support them.
Right. Dr. Nicole Robinson, I thank you so much for joining me on this show today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You must do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Larry. It's been great.
Thank you so much. You're watching the Power Hour right here.